Welcome to this webinar about technology innovation in value supply chains. This event is initiated by Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation here at Rady School of Management in UC San Diego. And this is actually part of a big series of webinars that we have done, including post-globalization movement, together with Helen Wang here. We identified more regionalization in supply chains in that project. In addition, we also looked at a future autonomous transportation, working with the Jacobs School of Engineering at UC San Diego. And also the latest webinar that we have done was about the sustainability, working with IBM. And in this webinar, we'll focus more on the technology innovation in value supply chains. Specifically, we will have two panel discussions. The first panel discussion is about embracing changes in value chains, in particular more on the leadership perspectives. And the second one is more towards on the technologies. And with that, a few quick logistics. So first of all, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button throughout our panel discussions. We will address those questions towards the end, around 10:40 in the Q&A sessions. So please use the Q&A button to ask any questions, okay? With that, this is also our second webinar working with Heliziglu Data Science Institute. The first one we have done in February about the impact of data science on supply chains. And this is our second webinar. And with that, I will pass on to Rajesh, who is the founding director of Heliziglu Data Science Institute. He is also a Qualcomm professor here at UC San Diego. With that, Rajesh.
Thank you, Dr. Shen. Thank you for inviting me to this event. One thing, the institute is Heliziglu Data Science Institute, and the way to think about it is that the C is a G, and then the second G doesn't exist. So, no, thank you. This is a good time to be actually talking about the supply chain and value add that it provides to business and our lives. Several years ago, Tom Friedman wrote a book on Earth is Flat. And that book could potentially be described as nothing else but introducing to the reader the role that businesses such as UPS and others had in synchronizing the world's business, mainly through supply chain, as a great synchronizer of all business activities. At the time, logistics seemed to be the most critical component of supply chain. And what we have seen in recent years, especially with COVID and delivery of vaccines and so on, that supply chain is not just about keeping businesses going, but indeed it is about maintaining lifelines, literally, and lifelines of society, whether it's delivery of medicines or to resources, to care, to response to emergencies. And then when you go forward, it actually has enormous defense implications too. Knowing the vulnerabilities of supply chain of an adversary is a great strategic advantage. And I'm sure countries spend time studying those vulnerabilities as well. So fast forward from those days of a flat Earth from Tom Friedman. Very recently, Helen Wang has shared with me a proposal for a master's program in this area. And that was also very well written with respect to the importance of supply chain. And when I saw through this, what really one sees is a science emerging of addressing availability through disruptions, through uncertainties of availability, and so on. Data science is about dealing with uncertainties in a very specific way through the provenance of data. And when you think about it, The reason data science has emerged as a strong area of impact is because the provenance of data has had the benefit of advances in technology in the last 40 years, especially when it comes to larger scale parallel computation, distributed computation, sensing, and therefore situational awareness. All of those technological pieces have come together to make this science of dealing with uncertainty, of inferring from what the information that is available in real time or in online, extraordinarily effective. Much of the advances we have had in recent years have been one of detecting patterns. In fact, we now have a saying that if there exists a pattern, no matter how complicated, in the data you're sensing, there are now algorithms and methods and tools that will automatically determine it. Not only they will automatically determine it, but they will also put it to use. And you see that in every day. Your Google autocorrect, well, sometimes it doesn't work, but your spelling checker, for example, your Google Translate, your image recognition, they're all nothing but application of detecting patterns. So this unreasonable effectiveness of data into solving problem is now often referred to as artificial intelligence of the new time. And of course, the moment we use the word artificial intelligence, it invokes the images of intelligence itself. But intelligence really is of making correct inferences. And that correct inferences that can be adapted to context, is something that is going to be the defining advance of coming decades. So with that in mind, about 4 years ago, actually less than 4 years ago, we'll be reaching 4th year in March 2022, we launched Halijolu Data Science Institute as a new kind of organization that would not only cultivate the field, but also cultivate the talent with the field. And cultivating talent means offering degree programs, offering courses. I'm happy to say, after 3 years after the launch, we now have over 1,000 students in our undergraduate program. And we will be launching in fall 3 graduate programs. One of them is a Master's of Data Science program, residential. One of them is PhD in Data Science. And then probably the most exciting, online Master's in Data Science. It is the first degree of its kind in the entire UC system of this title, which is approved by its academic senate, not only approved by academic senate, but also overseen by academic senate in terms of its quality of instructions and degree and so on. So that will be launched in fall this coming year, and then the admissions is starting in the spring sometime. So we are pretty excited to pull these programs together, because teaching students and creating knowledge is also a means by which we contribute to society. So today, I'm very happy to see this event come together. It's one of the important application areas and the areas that will actually advance the knowledge itself in data science. So thank you for inviting me to this event. And thank you, Helen and Dr. Shen, for pulling it together. And I look forward to the panels today.
Great. Thank you very much, Rajesh. In addition to add on to that society impact, really our effort here is building on the community of, let's say, supply chains, leveraging the data science as well as technologies. And it is really our pleasure to work with Rajesh's team at Halijolu Data Science Institute.
Thank you.
With that, I will pass on to Helen. Helen is currently the CEO of W Consulting, and she has been working on Google X to Apple to Foxconn. But one thing that I would like to emphasize more is I worked with her as a faculty director of the Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation. I worked with her in the Institute. She has been the chair of the advisory board members. And it has been really great journey. And especially we identified, working with Helen, we identified the differentiator of our institute, which really leverages and emphasizes the future supply chains. And talking about the future supply chains, we both believe that the key here is the impact of innovation and technologies, as well as the data science. So this webinar will fit very well into that theme of future supply chains, in particular related to the impact of technologies and data science in the supply chains. With that, Helen.
Thank you, Dr. Shing. Good morning, faculty and students of UC San Diego, industry leaders and practitioners around the globe, and dreamers, technologists, and visionaries of the future. As the chair of ISEI, I am honored to welcome our board members and their distinguished guest speakers. As an industry professional, I'm excited to learn from my peers about the innovative trend within value supply chain. Finally, as a professor, I'm thrilled to link our students with corporate executives and serial entrepreneurs from the technology industry, energy sector, and the investment community. For more than a decade, I was very fortunate to work for two of the most innovative companies, Apple and Google, whose products are being used by all of us every day. People often ask me whether Apple and Google have anything in common. This is what I think. First of all, both companies started in Silicon Valley as startups and later become international leaders in technology. Secondly, both companies developed their secret recipes to build extraordinary products and acquired unique competitive advantages through the value supply chain ecosystem. Lastly, and most importantly, their innovative culture, entrepreneur mindset, and enthusiastic passion to technology lead to sustainable business growth. Although industry and education are two different words, there seems to be a perfect alignment between the technology-driven industries and the UC San Diego. On one hand, UC San Diego defines itself as a research-oriented public university with an entrepreneur spirit. On the other hand, strong integrations between culture, people, and technology serves as a universal modality for successful companies. To facilitate and connect the innovation stream between industry and the university, ISEI introduced the Learning and Research Platform earlier this year. This platform also creates opportunities for ISEI to partner with Rajesh, the Data Science Institute, engineering, and other schools within San Diego. We believe that events like this build a collaborative community where culture, people, and technology meet to spark innovation. If you are curious about what's next, I invite you to follow ISEI on LinkedIn and attend our future events. Entrepreneurs wear many hats, and today's speakers illustrate this concept. You will hear the importance of leadership in digital transformation. You will learn how the value supply chain utilizes emerging technologies, such as the Internet of Things, blockchain, and AI. You will also peek into the future and envision your roles and contributions as students, entrepreneurs, and future generation leaders. Thank you again for being here with us today, and please enjoy the rest of the event. Dr. Shing, back to you.
Thank you very much, Helen. So with that, let's begin the journey, another journey. Our first panel is about embracing changes. The topic is about embracing changes in value chains, in particular in the executive leadership perspective. Our moderator will be Shahid Javed, and Shahid is one of our advisory board members. And in our institute, we had many other board members as well in the big companies. And Shahid has been working in this procurement area and supply chain area over 2 decades in companies like BP, JLL, TIAA, and now at Aimbridge Hospitality. And not only in terms of industry experience, I also personally had an experience working with Shahid on one case studies related to procurement and leveraging the data. And he also taught in one of my classes, which has been really, really fun. So I would like to thank Shahid on that too. With that, Shahid will moderate on the topic of embracing changes in value chains. And to you, Shahid.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Shin, for the fantastic introduction. Welcome to everybody to join our panel discussion today. It's an extremely important topic at both Rajesh and Dr. Helen mentioned that data science, artificial intelligence, technology has been really changing how we live. As we all know, the supply chains have been impacted, and for a few years, the talk was all about globalization. And then COVID hit us. And then we saw the challenges with globalization, but then localization started coming in. At the same time, technology has been impacting us in everything we do today, and all across our life. Technology is impacting every industry, every part of what we do. Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada, a couple of years ago said, the pace of change has never been this fast, which is absolutely right. Things are changing very, very fast because of technology. And he said that pace of change has never been this fast, but he didn't stop there. He continued to say that the pace of change will never be this slow again, meaning the change is becoming faster and faster, and it's all happening because of technology. Age-old companies where I work and several of the panelists, they've been trying to embrace that technology-led innovation, but they're also struggling with the change. So today we have put together a phenomenal panel for you, folks who are entrepreneurs who started their own companies. We have venture capital represented here. We have experts in procurement, ex-CPOs represented here. And I've assembled them really to address these topics around innovation, because to make technology innovation successful, it's not only about technology, it's actually about leadership. It's actually about change management. It also is about embracing the data science that's all around us. So with that, let me introduce the panelists to you. Melanie, you're sharing the screen. If you can move forward. We'll start with Andrew Butt. Andrew.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Shahid. It's great to be here. So I'll talk about my kind of background and how I got started with Enable in a few minutes, but just very briefly, I would say that I have had experience creating several companies and also in industry, which has really led to Enable, the company that I'm running now. I have really kind of created and bootstrapped companies and grown them profitably and organically. And now with Enable, we're growing very, very rapidly and we are venture backed. So I look forward to talking with you more about kind of my background and how it led to this in a moment. If we just go on to the next slide, what I'd like to maybe set out in a little more detail is what Enable does and its importance in the supply chain, because I think that is very relevant to the discussion today. So Enable is actually a software as a service platform for managing business to business deals and incentives and rebates which exist in the supply chain. And if you think about this, it's quite fascinating because more than 2/3 of global trade actually goes through the supply chain between manufacturers, through distributors and retailers to the end customers. And clearly very topical for today in terms of how supply chain partners work together closely to better serve customers. So that's exactly where our technology plays a huge role. And you know, really building this collaborative network in the supply chain across many different industries. So we've got 50,000 partners in that network right now, really working together collaboratively to better serve customers. That is what Enable is all about. And very pleased to be here today and have the opportunity to give my perspective on kind of technology in the supply chain.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. With that, again, the key thing here is that Andrew has taken the whole traditional supply chain function into revenue generation using technology, leveraging the supply chain. It's a very unique approach here. Thank you for that, Andrew. Let's move next to Sudhir.
Firstly, thank you, Shahid, and thanks for this wonderful opportunity. It's nice to talk to everybody here. As an introduction, I got into procurement roughly 12 years back when I joined a company called Ariba, which eventually got acquired by SAP. Now it's called SAP Ariba. It's still the biggest procurement company in the world, generates roughly $1.6 billion in revenue, and I ran the product group. So one thing I'll say about procurement until I joined Ariba, I didn't know what procurement was. I didn't know what role it plays actually. Surprise, surprise, it plays a key role. Think about an engineer at a Ford Motor Company. He's not working on production line to see, hey, how do I produce 1 million Ford F-150s? He's working on the next EV car. How do I get to the next EV car? How do I innovate? So the point that Shahid is mentioning around innovation, the pace of innovation is increasing. Having run the biggest procurement company, I can tell you the friction that exists within the organization and the friction that exists for suppliers to work with companies is massive. Some of it is valid, like compliance and regulatory are valid. Some of them is actually not valid, is manufactured. It's living in old age. If I give you an example, if you search for a company name on Google, you see a right-hand panel. It's called Knowledge Panel. Google has done a wonderful job using AI and all kinds of techniques and some manual too, let's not pretend, to showcase that experience. Look at the same experience of an employee within a company when they search for a supplier. It takes, we talk about using a blockchain for provenance, but the reality is it still takes 8 weeks for a company to onboard a new supplier. So that brings me to the company that I'm working on. I'm the CEO and founder of Oro Labs. Our goal is very, very simple. Can we be the supplier platform for the organization? Can we make it easy for companies to do business with each other? The pace at the point of pace is at the heartbeat of what we do. We remove friction. We make it easy for companies to do business with each other. Instead of taking 8 weeks to do business with a supplier, you should be able to do it in 8 hours. Why does it take 8 weeks? I mean, I can find more information about a supplier on ZoomInfo than in my ERP of a supplier who I spent $10 million with. So we are really trying to see how we can truly be the information company for a supplier and remove the friction that is really needed to truly work for 2 companies to work with each other. So thank you, Shahid.
Yeah, thank you, Sudhir. Again, a very critical topic. In all my procurement roles, the friction you're talking about is absolutely real, and engaging them is not that simple. Thank you for that, Sudhir, introduction. Let's move next to Sharad.
Hi, Shahid, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making me part of this esteemed panel. So quick background, I spent 15 years helping large companies in their supply chain and procurement. Spend most of my time across all emerging technologies, from AI to blockchain to automation. Worked with almost every major Fortune 50 company in major industry categories. And after doing that for 15 years, I decided to move on the dark side. So a year and 3 months ago, I quit my job at Ernst & Young. My last role, actually, I was a global blockchain leader for supply chain and procurement. And I convinced another co-founder from, my colleague from Ernst & Young. So both of us quit EY and we started this company, DSilo, which I'll talk shortly. Very excited to be part of this panel. My work has always been in the intersection of supply chain and technology, and how new and emerging technologies can be used in supply chains to accelerate value, whether it's used to maximize revenues or used as a way of helping in terms of being a cost competitive edge. And that's the intersection I'm really personally very passionate about. So what is DSilo? So me and my co-founder have developed this deep learning based AI platform where we're really tackling the big issue of contract value management. So if you really look at most companies today, they are trying to do a good job when it comes to contract lifecycle management and going and negotiating supplier contracts. And then on the other area, they're spending a lot of money in building new P2P systems and trying to get their transactional data going. But most companies today have a big gap between contracts and transactional data. And that's what really DSilo is all about. So as the name says, to destroy organizational silos. So the silo between contract data and procure to pay data. So we've actually developed patent pending technology to read highly complex supplier contracts and convert those contracts into insights, look at it against existing procure-to-pay systems, and help companies really look for value leakage opportunities. I did this manually and using automation tools for 10 years of my life as a consultant. And that's when we realized there was a better way to do it by automating it and making it fully self-service and disrupting the need of consultants. And that was the reason why we kind of started DSilo, and really happy to kind of talk more about this space and have a good discussion with everyone.
Thank you, Sharad, again, dealing with the whole contract value leakage, been there, seen that. So great that you're addressing that problem. Next, let's jump to Sean.
Thanks for including me. It's really fun following two of my CEOs on this panel. So Andrew and Sudhir are two of my last three investments. I'm a partner at Norwest Venture Partners. We're the second oldest venture firm in the country, 60 years old. We're investing out of a $2 billion fund. We have a lot of different categories at Norwest: enterprise, consumer, healthcare, India, and Israel. My focus is business applications, both seed A and B. I do more A's than B's, more B's than seeds, and have done a couple C rounds. I have 10 companies in my portfolio, and 3 are in the supply chain space. The other one that's not here today is Propel, and I will talk about them later. But prior to becoming a VC, I worked at a few SaaS companies where I joined at the A round, Cornerstone, WageWorks, and Upwork, and I was focused on the sales and business development leadership areas. All the companies eventually went public, which so I'm hoping I get that lucky here as an investor. Hopefully Oro and Enable can go public with me as an investor.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And maybe I'll just tee up a question for you before we get to Evelyn, our last speaker. How did you get into investing in startups and into supply chain?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of angel investing and advising of startups throughout my operating career. And so I was kind of doing this job on the side, and I was asked if I want to become a VC, and it was, hard to say no to that. If I think about why I've invested in so many supply chain companies, my focus really is next generation players that have a disruptible competitor in their space. So the disruptible competitor is someone that might be on-premise or SaaS 1.0. They've already helped create a budget in the market. It's very hard for startups to create a completely new budget. And so, with Enable, you've got Vistex as the legacy player. They're on-premise, and then you've got CEO that's got deep domain experience. And so Vistex is more the on-premise player. In the enterprise, we are pretty greenfield in the mid-market, and then in the enterprise, we're going after them for potential replacement. Oro, you've got Ariba as the legacy player. They're like a SaaS 1.0 solution, and Sudhir comes from Ariba, so who else better to do that? And then Propel is in the product lifecycle management space. Their legacy player is Agile, which is still on premise, and most of that market is manual in the mid-market, while we're replacing Agile in the enterprise. The CEO actually comes from Agile, and he's brought a bunch of his team from there.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that view, Sean. And again, there's a lot of money sitting out there looking for the right investment. So thank you for that. Let's jump to our final panelist, Evelyn. Evelyn and I work together in BP, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Evelyn.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be part of this event today. 30 plus years of working in the energy industry. The person in the hot seat for developing the strategy, as well as ensuring delivery. So very familiar with the likes of SAP, Ariba, paid the price, Sudhir, when working in my last employer, where we did not do all the version updates. And so when SAP bought over Ariba, SAP, after a period of time, said, we will no longer support version 2 or whatever it was. And here we were caught off guard, but clearly, you know, in a very difficult, precarious situation. And so, yeah, technology at the pace it advances does require us to continue to install and stay current with new versions. Since leaving the corporate world, I have become a board member. I am currently on a private equity-backed board. I'm an independent advisor to Bain & Company. And most of my focus there is providing support into the Bain team of experts as they pursue supply chain transformation work with a number of high-profile energy clients. I am also a consultant and currently working in support of the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. A quick snapshot of my career. I started out on a rotation career many years ago, before a lot of you were born, I think. And it was in the construction yards who were setting out to build the first of the heavy steel structures for the North Sea. That, would you believe, was back in the days of mainframe computers. And so I've been part of the journey from the days of mainframe to what we have today. Going through my career, I have been involved in M&A activity. I was involved actually in the largest single instance SAP implementation of its time in the late 90s, which was a Halliburton company single instance effort. That also preceded all the challenges with Y2K. And I'm sure some of you people today remember all the uncertainties about what would happen, on 31/12/1999. So a lot of Y2K readiness. Fast forward through the years, I have enjoyed the benefits that technology has brought to bear as someone leading, highly complex supply chain organizations. I've also experienced the pain that is, that comes with that. I mean, a lot of my experience academically has been in the psychology and neuroscience area. And I would just leave the audience today with my reflection based on listening, so far today. My emphasis tends to be on the human intersection with technology, because multi-generations in the workplace all embrace technology from, their own particular frames of reference. And as our panelists today will attest, not everybody embraces technology in the same way. Many people fear the technology, feel threatened by it, feel a loss of identity. And so a lot of my emphasis is on the human system side of advancing in business. I'll leave it there. I'm sure we'll come back to that later today.
Yeah, thank you, Evelyn. And absolutely, the human intersection with technology is a key topic we will cover today. But before we get to the human side and the talent side, which is important to the students here as well, I want to start at a higher level to talk about how is technology shaping the company value chains. When I went to college, and learned about sourcing early in my career, it's all about cost cutting, all about sourcing, and really about logistics. But here we have, panelists who are tackling multiple other ends of supply chain. So maybe I'll start with you, Andrew, and then the same question will apply to all our speakers today. Why is technology important, and what role is it playing to help the end consumer?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, again, like I said in my introduction, we must remember that more than 2/3 of all of global trade goes through a supply chain. Okay, it doesn't go directly from, say, a manufacturer to a consumer. It goes through trading partners in between. And collaboration between those trading partners really does help the end customer. The end customer wants a seamless experience. They don't want to know or care about the fact there's a complex supply chain in place. So I think where technology is playing a huge role is allowing that to happen much more seamlessly. If you think about it, retailers, distributors, those in the middle of the supply chain, they are really the eyes and the ears for manufacturers and providers of services. They understand customers, they know what customers want, they often understand the local market that they're in. Whereas the manufacturer or the provider is very innovative and is creating hopefully great products and services. So for me, it's almost about kind of getting those supply chain partners more aligned through using technology to share data, to collaborate together, and work much more seamlessly to serve end customers. And I think that very directly leads to end customers receiving a better service.
Yeah.
And mentioning the collaboration point, want to go back to Propel. They're replacing Agile, who's on premise, really hard to use, really hard to do collaboration, and people only use that in product and engineering as the buyer. But the solutions are supposed to be for product lifecycle management, to get products to market faster. And in order to do that, you need to have an easy to use mobile SaaS solution that works as well in your business life as your consumer life. And there's a lot of remote workers. And so by having a solution like Propel, you not only have product and engineering as users and buyers, they've expanded to sales, marketing, customers, and partners. Having all those people involved gets the products to market faster and even better products.
So better products, shorter lead time to get to the market. So critical needs for the consumer. Sharad, Sudhir, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. So Shahid, if you really look at the last 3 decades, right, of how supply chains have evolved, traditionally supply chains were all about process standardization. Now that's where the Six Sigmas and the Leans and the Toyota production systems have their genesis, right? And now when you look at so many different vectors affecting supply chains, both in terms of the societal and the geographical changes, the environmental changes, the level of variability has gone rapidly high. And process standardization and centralization just doesn't kind of work anymore. And that's actually resulted in a massive influx of technology required to handle that variability and variations that are impacting. And that's why you've seen the last 5-10 years an acceleration of technology. And I think last 5 years, a massive acceleration in technology in the world of supply chain, because now a supply chain executive who's so ingrained in process standardization needs to now also look at process variability. And I can totally see why Sudhir decided to start his new startup, because the traditional ERP implementation way of just standardizing and deploying just doesn't cut it anymore. And I think that's why a lot of these executives and organizations are becoming more acceptable to these new and emerging technologies, so that they can work around the variabilities that are coming in supply chains today.
Yeah, maybe Shahid, if I could just build on that. There's a couple of themes in my mind that, at the end of the day, it's about business, right? It's about performance. And, technology can become a necessary enabler to drive out waste, to aid efficiency. We live in a society today where we expect real time, we want speed, we want better, faster, cheaper. And I think that's, where technology can basically replace a lot of the steps and processes that were previously, human dependent. And I pulled a statistic yesterday that might interest people, that in 2020, there were 4.35 million new business applications submitted, according to the US business formation statistics. 4.35 million new businesses. If you think about being an existing business, think about how competitive the world is, right? And in order to succeed, there's something about better, faster, cheaper. And I think this is where some of the brightest and the smartest of thinking is coming forth. And so this forever evolving theme, and just I think quite simply the creativity of advancing, say, from an SAP maybe to an Ariba, to a D-Silo, or to an Oro. It's just all there. It's all there. And I think this intersection between business performance and the need to get the return on investment, which I guess that's Sean's big kick. But on the other end of that is consumer experience, right? And I think that fuels a lot of the creativity and the motivation. And, Sharad, you spoke to it really well.
I mean, the only thing, I think the topics are very well covered. The only other way I would think of it is, end of the day, a lot of things are about decision making. How do I make a decision faster? What enables me to make a decision faster? And really, it's the information. If I want to make a decision on my personal life, I can find information online reasonably easily. I can use my friends to get referrals, as a simple example. Why is it that we can't use the same information to make the supply chain and the procurement decisions so that things go faster? And I think that's the heart of the problem as well. I feel in an information age, information is not used to drive the decision. And instead, I would say extra steps are added to a process just to safeguard the things. And that's a very old way of thinking, actually. The new way of thinking is, how do I use the information in the best possible way? And this is where the SaaS 2.0 also comes in my opinion. All the applications that you see in the supply chain area, they are highly information driven, highly driven towards the point, how can decisions be made faster and potentially even automated? But the reality is, can we at least get to a point where the information is available to make the right decision, either by human or by machines, as fast as possible? I personally still believe, I'm in the camp which believes humans still make good decisions. And having seen all the AI and machine learning, having played with all the neural networks out there as a hobby for myself, I still believe humans have something to offer here. So I believe information is powerful, and this is where the new technology is going to help.
Yeah, as I've seen technology evolve, we have had Oracle, SAP, ERP systems for decades now. And the big change I see happening now is that earlier on, companies were trying to build end-to-end solutions to be everything to a company. But now all of you here, whether it's Andrew, you or Sudhir or Sharad, or investments, Sean, you are looking at a niche problem, a specific problem in the entire value chain. Let's not go after fix everything in the value chain. Let's find a unique issue that we have a still friction with, problems with. Let's go tackle that. So that's really, really innovating to see how the technology companies even are looking at them. And then from a CPO perspective, how we're looking to embrace those niche solutions. So let's maybe pivot to our next topic here, which is innovation in leadership. And I'll probably start with you, Evelyn, in that space, since you're passionate in this space. What I find in my experience is these age-old companies who have tremendous leaders, they're trying to change, but they're having a very difficult time embracing these technologies. And it's a lot more around change management. And it's a lot about leadership and their own style. So maybe, Evelyn, to start with you, and then we'd love to hear from Sean as what you've seen in your conversations and the challenges, Andrew, you, Sudhir, and Sharad have seen. But how does leadership need to change to truly embrace this technological revolution?
Thank you. I think Sudhir touched on some of this just by his comments, because, to some people, data evokes emotional reactions. People don't trust the data. People only trust their own data, and so on. And so, change and our response to change is very personal, and it starts with self. And it's all shaped by our own unique, and personal journeys in life. And so our ability to trust others, our ability to listen to ideas that are, presented by others. And so, we've got these childhood memories where, our life was expected to be predictable. And we have the neuroscience aspect where our brains, they're protecting us from danger. So we have these neural pathways that have been established in our head where there's familiarity. And it's really hard to break that. And I think as leaders, step one is to understand how we are configured as individuals. You know, you have to look back, sort of regress back to the childhood experiences, right? Because if you were brought up in an environment where failure was never an option, and that, you know, you were, you know, maybe shielded from experimentation and so on, trust me, that will still be in your bag today. It'll be with you today. So for me, a piece that's often missing in leadership is the knowledge of the emotional intelligence aspect, the self-awareness. What are my triggers? Why do I find it difficult to engage in a new topic? And so there's a key step there. And so because most of that resistance comes from people fearing a loss of identity, fearing a loss of control. Yeah, think of Sudhir going into an organization with a new idea, right? The movie that's running in some people's heads is, oh, okay, well, I don't get this. This all sounds too complicated. And therefore they catastrophize and they think that their world, their career is ending, right? Because there's this new tech idea coming along. And so in my mind and in my experience, you have to, as leaders, beyond the knowing who self is and what the triggers are, you've got to be much more open-minded to the reality that exists around us today. You got to take people on the journey. You've got to be empathetic towards those who have difficulty, and then work towards presenting facts to these individuals, investing time so that they can overcome and perhaps diffuse some of their myths. But it's a contact sport, right? And it's not something that can be just simply brushed over, because if you do not take these people with you as a leader, they will slow down your transformation. They will slow down your process. And so, you know, understanding the human psyche, meeting people where they are at, trying to understand what they see as the barriers, being generous enough to hear what their concerns are, and then work to countering their concerns, and then try to achieve alignment. Let me pause there, because this could be a panel topic on its own. But yeah, I'll stop there, and perhaps some of my fellow panelists you know, have a similar or alternative view.
Yeah. Let's hear from the others in terms of how do we drive innovation and leadership to embrace this change.
I think everything that Evelyn said is completely valid there, and I guess my perspective, I come at this a little bit differently as a technology company, and you know, being a SaaS, you know, cloud 2.0 type solution. Many of my kind of peer CEOs are selling into, you know, very high tech buyers, and again, I'm selling into the supply chain. And I would say I sort of recognize a lot of that resistance to change, where, you know, we're talking to procurement leaders, we're talking to supply chain leaders, we're talking to kind of finance leads, and they don't necessarily have that same. And these are also in quite traditional companies in my case. So you know, lots of companies distributing and supplying physical goods. So it's not like selling to another technology company. And I definitely see that resistance to change. I think the other angle I would add to this is, you know, you talk about people not trusting data, which I come across all the time. And, you know, I've got my data and you've got your data, but that even happens within an organization, doesn't it? And what we are seeing is, how can data be shared across the supply chain? So taking an even bigger leap and saying, rather than kind of having different supply chain partners arguing with each other on which data is correct, actually having data in the cloud that everyone can drive off. And so I think from a leadership point of view, the old world, it was all about we need to get as much as we can out of our supplier, or, you know, we need to squeeze more out, and how can we kind of, you know, how can we beat them up? But the more enlightened way to do this is to recognize that by sharing data and working together, it does truly lead to a better result. It's not about that short-term tactic of just getting the maximum short-term benefit. It is about that transparency. Data sharing does help us to serve customers better, and we can actually drive profitable growth for each other by having that transparency and using technology. So that's a big thing that we're seeing, and the way we approach it is on an industry by industry basis, because it's like a kind of momentum where once we can get key kind of distributors and manufacturers using technology and using the same technology on a modern cloud platform, then that makes it easier to bring the next one along and the next one along, and there starts to be more value as you would always see from a network type model. So I guess to summarize, I think really that kind of enlightened thinking about sharing and transparency across the supply chain really does lead to better results for everyone, would be key, and really trying to establish industry solutions that give confidence to once you can get one doing it, then we definitely see others following.
Let me give I think, firstly, I agree with Evelyn and Andrew, no doubts about it. I think, but here's the other interesting dynamic, right? I personally believe market is going to push these leaders too. Let's not forget about that. I mean, I was talking to one of the largest chemical companies, one of the groups in one of the largest chemical companies, and the president of this group is telling me he has grown the revenue of his group by 25x in 3 years. Now, growing a revenue of a group in a large company with $40+ billion in revenue, 25x. Now, that's not common. That's not common. The question then becomes is, how did he achieve that? Was he open to changing whatever he was doing prior to that? Firstly, he actually, by the way, the good news for supply chain people and procurement people, he actually did a lot of innovation with suppliers to achieve that result. But more importantly, he actually embraced the change. So the results actually will push. And actually, if you look at the same thing, if you look at Coca-Cola as a company, you will see a lot of, again, public information from them tells you that Coca-Cola as a company spends a lot of money on marketing. That's a known fact. But if you think about the creative director at a small company, creative director does not want to work for a large company. He wants to work for a boutique shop. He wants to have his own boutique shop. Now, what I'm trying to describe is a market scenario where if you are a Coke, do you want to work with a small creative director who's really, really good? Or do you want to just continue to think that, hey, I'm only going to work with large companies because the risk is low? Then you're going to miss out on the talent. So the point I'm trying to make here is the market conditions are going to also force people to change the behavior, change everything internally as well. But it's not easy, having said all that.
Shahid, I think what I would really like to add is what we are at least seeing at DSilo and our observations for the past few years. The concept of change management with executives itself is changing. Because now with Twitter, Instagram, everybody is consuming data in bite-sized, but it's also consuming a lot of hype data. So, look, everybody talks about how blockchain will change the world today, how AI will change the world today, right? So as these executives are also consuming that data, yes, there is a sense of fear, but I think they're also getting sucked into that hype. So a lot of the time when we as a bleeding edge deep learning AI company go to a large organization, it's sometimes really pulling those executives from the ledge down to tell them, yes, we can do a lot of the things you're saying, but it's a journey. Yeah. It's not happening tomorrow. It's going to happen over a journey. Here's how we're going to create value for you using these emerging technologies. And this is how, because by the end of the day, we are successful as entrepreneurs as our clients are successful in delivering value, right? So, and I think that's where the responsibility of also bleeding edge technology companies like all of us comes in providing more realistic view to these executives so then they can manage that change better. And I think a lot of that time, I remember early days of my career, it was all about building those change management and training and helping executives kind of learn new stuff. But these days, I would say it's like what a doctor says, yeah, right? A patient comes today who's already Googled everything that I'm going to tell him and questions me. I think that's what's even happening today when you go to these technology executives, because they have been to these seminars and they've been hyped up about what it will do for you tomorrow. And I think a lot of the time is helping kind of tell them what can be done today.
Yeah.
So I think that itself is kind of evolving, which what we're observing at DSilo.
I just have something quick to add. Coming from an operating background at startups and then working with several startups, is that we consistently look for early adopters, those that will take risks at working with an early stage company. I've found that those that take risks early have a better chance of getting promoted. Plus, they can stay ahead of their competition because they can help define the roadmaps of these software companies.
No, great points. I think points from, how do we create the single source of truth for all data, to even the role of procurement, from being a cost-cutting function to revenue generation function to EBITDA margin, enhancing function, driving that additional value for the business is changed. And your point, Sean, about risk takers, right? You are the first adopters, first movers, and you can really make a difference. We are coming close to the end of our first panel, but I'll have one last question. I wish I had another 2 hours to continue here with the fantastic conversation, but one last question for this group before I turn it back to Dr. Shin. There are a lot of students on the call today, and they're thinking about their skills. They're thinking about the courses. They're thinking about talent. So can you talk about and give us a perspective on skills needed in the future, skills needed now, the workforce of the future? So anybody can take the lead, and it will be great to get input from others as well.
Let me just maybe kick us off, because I think it's a great question. And if I was a student today, I'd be open to ideas. I think, I tend to think about this in sort of a couple of parts. I think that emotional intelligence side of the professional life is going to get bigger. So I think the EQ and the IQ, the book smart and the street smart, I think is an element. I think the ability to lead multi-generational teams. There's going to be a lot more diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a bigger social expectation than there has ever been around environmental, social, and governance. And so this connection between a person's values and how they want to contribute to the world is a growing consideration. Clearly, your ability to mine data, not be afraid of data, the whole analytics, being comfortable in these areas, they're going to become table stake skills. They are, no longer going to be the, what distinguishes one individual from another. So I think Sharad, Sudhir, Andrew, and the rest of the panel, it will be interesting to get their view. But I think the key thoughts that I have, is this it's this ability to be very comfortable within the multi-generational, clearly a diverse group of whether it be customers or working partners, and likely people will have more and more gig economy, but more and more hyphen career, portfolio career. So there's something about what matters, where you want to dedicate your time, and the like. But yeah, for me, EQ and IQ, don't forget the EQ, because regardless of how automated and how much sci-fi our life becomes, there will still be human beings along the way. Yeah. So I'll hand over to my colleagues to build on that, perhaps.
So maybe I'll just have a quick add. I think what I would advise most students to do as they come into the workforce is to get comfortable with uncertainty.
True.
And be comfortable with it, because by the end of the day, technologies are going to change, dimensions are going to change. Your ability to stay focused in a period of uncertainty as things evolve around you is a really important skill set as you kind of move out of your educational kind of setting and move to a more of a career.
What I'd say is I'd recommend not being loose in the saddle. I see too many people later in their career that are moving around company to company every year. And then at some point, people give up wanting to hire them because it takes a year to get them ramped and they move on to something else. So the grass is not always greener. A lot of times you go somewhere else and it's not what you signed up for. I think a lot of companies are embracing what you might call internal talent mobility because they recognize that, kind of this loose in the saddle concept. And it's also, really hard to attract and retain employees these days. So allowing people to share their skills and experiences across the organization on different projects, moving jobs within the organization. I actually did invest in a company that helped pioneer this called Rally Team, which Workday acquired. And the other point, me coming from a go-to-market background, with remote work being a big component of how people are selling today, it's changed the type of salespeople that companies are hiring. Some salespeople would only sell through wining and dining and entertaining people, and a lot of the sales process is over Zoom, and so people need to kind of rethink of some of these jobs via hybrid environments.
Yeah. Thank you. So, there anything from you or Andrew?
Maybe Sean, send them a bottle of wine beforehand and then drink it over Zoom. Well, that seems to be quite effective. I've noticed. But I guess I agree with all of what's been said, and just to throw in a completely different angle again and think about technology and technology skills. I remember a few years ago, I was running a company which was called DCS e-commerce, and e-commerce was a thing. It was a distinct thing. And of course, now everything is e-commerce. The way we buy things is online, and that's been, the E has been dropped from e-commerce. And, we were talking, Shahid, about IoT, Internet of Things, and this will just become the internet. I mean, it's not IoT. Everything is kind of the Internet of Things. And also, we've heard a lot about how every company is a software company, and teaching people at a very young age to code is important. So what I see is when we look at some of the current kind of generation of technologies, and whether we're looking at things like blockchain, AI, ML, predictive analytics, some of those things we talked about earlier, again, every company will be an AI company. Every company will be building machine learning and predictive analytics. These really are the building blocks of the future. So, I really do believe that every company, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's kind of retail distribution, or a pure play kind of tech company, it is fundamentally a technology company, and those skills are really important.
I'll just add quickly something on top of it. Actually, we just hired a 16-year-old high school person into our company. So we gave her a challenge. It's a very world famous challenge. If you're a software engineer, it's called Dijkstra's algorithm. So that's one of the tests we use for hiring software engineers. She wrote the code in Python. See, this is a 16-year-old, let's remember that. And her code was better code than I've ever seen, literally. And it's incredible. We of course hired her, and she decided not to go to college, which is good for us. And I think what this point it highlights is this challenge that exists in the younger generation is real, and it's here to stay. And it is going to get accentuated even more. And the only thing I would say is when I interview people, I focus on basics. I don't focus on if you know the algorithm called XYZ. But if you don't know the basics, it's going to get very, very hard. In the world of data, you will get lost if you just don't learn the basics. So I highly encourage learning the fundamentals of data science. And this is a good time to do it. If you're in college, I recommend doing the basics as opposed to doing some fancy stuff, which actually may not be as fancy as you think.
Fantastic, folks. So thank you very, very much for fantastic insights and thoughts. And again, I wish I had another hour, but at this time I'll have to close our first panel. And back to you, Professor Shin. And we'll come back with some Q&A at the end.
Great. Thank you very much, Shahid and the team. It was really insightful and helpful. In particular, I caught up sort of three keywords on I's or INs, on information and innovation. And lastly, Evelyn mentioned also inclusiveness, right? Also, I can't agree more on, in particular for students here, to learn how to consume the data or the information or the technology instead of being consumed by those, right? So learning more fundamentals, I can't agree more on that part. Also, taking risks, right? Being a early adopters, in particular, considering the speed of change these days, there's a huge first mover advantage. So taking more sort of a calculated risk is definitely another key factor. And lastly, don't miss out the people side. That's, in the end, we are not robots, we are humans. Even if there is all the technologies and the data and everything, in the end, we will make the decisions. So that part of human side and emotional intelligence, it's still a very important part of it. With that, let's move on to the second panel. The second panel discussion is about emerging technology and impact to the value chain, in particular focusing on the real estate. And Mark Messo will moderate the second panel. And Mark is also one of our board of advisors at Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation. Mark has been a value chain management leader with over 2 decades, and building a very high performing teams that deliver exceptional value through solutions, innovation, and operational excellence. He set up also several global supply services companies for high-tech multinationals, and he worked with industrial giants like ABB as head of operations and transformation and strategic outsourcing partnerships. With that, Mark.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you, Shin, for the introduction. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And Shahid, I think we're going to have a very interesting set of questions at the end of this panel 2 session. Our goal with this panel is to get specific on some technologies that are emerging and talk a little bit about how they're going to impact the value chain of real estate. Before I dive into introducing the panelists that are part of panel 2, I just want to frame a little bit what we're talking about today and what does that mean about the value chain of real estate, and prepare for you some of the questions that we're going to try and address on this panel discussion. But suffice it to say, technology that's emerging is going to affect how space is managed, designed, operated, and monetized, and that the technologies that have been mentioned in the previous panel, we heard a lot about blockchain, which is a subset of Web 3.0. We heard about IoT, and clearly what we have today are panelists that represent that space and are deep practitioners in this area. So we're going to talk about what are their technologies. We'll introduce the panelists. Talk about the technologies that their firms are working with and how that's going to disrupt the value chain of real estate. And I had to think about how do we frame this panel in a way that's narrow enough. And we look at value chain of real estate in terms of life cycle. When you conceptualize a building or real estate, that's a design phase. The second phase after you have a design is the construction, and that's the physical world, you could say. And once the building has been constructed, it's about how do you operate operate the building, and that's really where now these new business models and opportunities for the digital world to come and play. And we talk about the technologies that are enabling these new ecosystems. Now, thinking from a value chain or supply chain perspective, there's different statistics around, but roughly 80% of the life cycle cost of the building is during operations, and almost 100% of the value realization happens during operation. And so that's really what we'd like to focus on today with the panel discussion from that standpoint, is the technologies and how they impact during operations. A few more quick comments just to frame the discussion. There are trends, and why we pick real estate is because there's a lot of things happening in real estate, and the trends are going to play in or interplay with what we talk about now in technology. So post-COVID reintegration is a trend. How is space going to be used when people go back to work, and what are the patterns of use are going to be impacted? The sharing economy, which is We know Airbnb, at least from the residential world, but what about the commercial world, and how this sharing economy is going to be expanding itself? Sustainability, obviously a big topic everywhere, but the question is, how do you take specific and meaningful action? So what is the technology that allows you to look at the actions taken from a sustainability standpoint? Obviously, the life cycle of something starts with the design, but how you operate it and optimize it matters a lot. And a lot of the technologies are going to be enabling access to data, extraction of data, and then optimization around it. We'll talk about that in a moment. From intelligence and valuations, I say is, a building's just not a building. You could have different value streams emerging from real estate, and then that has an impact on the valuation of the structure itself. We talk about modular design and repurposing. So can a building have multiple purposes? Can it be repurposed? Can it be have multiple streams of utility that can be derived from that structure? The next part is about kind of solutions thinking. We heard one of the previous panel talk about customer experience or client experience, and think about buildings. Have they really changed their physical their design? Over the last, since they were the design concepts were introduced many years ago. What we have now is emergence of technology that needs to find a place in the building. And so this idea of solutions thinking, the footprint of where these technologies fit in the future design buildings is definitely a theme. And the last thing is thinking about, ties into this idea of ecosystem, about real estate is thinking about it as a partnership with the community. It's not just a silo box that sits, but there's a partnership with the community because the community is providing services and deeply integrated in with it. Last slide to kind of frame what we're talking about here is just thinking about who the stakeholders are within the real estate ecosystems. So if you think about the direct stakeholders here on the left side, you could have the owners of real estate or the landlords. You have stakeholders, which are the operators. You have the tenants, and you have the users and the clients. And what may seem what creates great complexity is this multi-stakeholder collaboration that has to happen. But data is generated by all of these different stakeholders at different stages of the operation of real estate. And so the question is, who owns the data and how can you make use of it? And what could that data be used for? These many different indirect stakeholders that have potential use for data that could be offering enhanced services, reduce cost, and so on. And so this is this interplay between the direct and indirect stakeholders where data is at the junction of these ecosystems. So with enough of my kind of preamble here, like to take the opportunity to introduce the three panelists. Tom Furstner is the Chief Technology Officer of Rady Code. He's got an incredible background, both as an academic, a practitioner, a scientist, and my personal feeling is that Rady Code is leading the way to the decentralized economy and truly figuring out how to deploy a lot of the technologies we've been talking about in the previous panel and making it real. So it's leading the way to the decentralized ecosystems and these new business models. I'm going to invite each of these presenters to augment my quick introduction. Dave, I can't say enough great things about Dave, so if I get started, I'll never stop, but I have just infinite respect for Dave as an innovator, as a social thinker, as a person that you can go to on incredible diverse number of topics. But Dave is somebody that makes ideas come real, and he has the platform at Flex, used to be called Flextronics, which is engaged in many different industry sectors, one of it which is the smart building sector, but Dave's got experience across many, and making these new how to apply technologies into product solutions. Don is also an incredibly passionate person. about technology and specifically in the area of data governance, and has a deep international experience working for multinationals and setting up teams that do advanced analytics. And because of his passion in that area, it's led him to setting up a company called Kiko, which he'll describe in a moment. But this interplay of data and how you share this data in a multi-stakeholder context so that you can untrap the value. Don is going to talk to you a little bit more about that. I'm going to turn it over to each of you in a moment, but why did I pick these three different panelists? There's one panelist that's missing. Sorry if I'm going to say Mike Monteith from ThoughtWire had a personal emergency and was unable to make it, but we're well taken care of with the three panelists here. Wanted to just say, well, how do these three panelists, why do we bring them three together? And how does it make sense in the kind of the domain, covering off the domains for which they represent? So Dave and the Flex world is largely focused on hardware design and manufacturing, and with deep knowledge on IoT or smart devices and sensors. These are the devices that are generating data once they're implemented. Tom from Riddle and Code is an innovator, so he's designing hardware solutions, but hardware solutions that are deeply integrated in the digital world. And so this bridge from the Web 2.0 to Web 3.0 world, Tom will talk a little bit more about, but he's making it real. He's making that transition real. And never mind, Don is about the data governance. So you've got devices that generate data. You have the ability to bring the data into the digital world in a governed way, and now you have data that has to be shared in a multi-party context, and so that's where Nevermind and the data governance comes in. So we have call it a full stack representation here from the panelists. I'd like to start with Tom. If you could please give us a quick introduction to yourself, talk about your technology and how you see it impacting the value chains. And we'll do this for the three panelists and then dive into some other questions.
Yes, so thank you for having me. What Riddle and Code does is basically very simple. Some years ago, we had something like an epiphany. So we thought, okay, it's incredible what you can do for digital assets concerning blockchain-derived technologies. But it would be even more interesting if you could use the same mechanisms and protocols and so on for physical objects. So now there's one basic problem, more or less related to physics. You cannot hash physical objects. It's impossible. So therefore you cannot bring them into a digital blockchain. But what you can do very well, you can bring the blockchain to the physical objects. And this is exactly what we started to do. So we researched electronic components, boards, chips design, algorithms, and started to build our own hardware. And we connect this hardware with any kind of physical object. So, I mean, from art to cars to energy and oil pipelines, smart meters, and so on. And once they are connected, they become full players on a blockchain and inside the blockchain environment. Yes, and we build then also and help our customers to build the necessary transient business models. That's it, basically.
Thank you, Tom. So we'll go deeper. Dave, would you care to go next, please? We need to take you off mute, I think.
Yeah, hey, sorry about that. Yeah, so Mark, I think you covered it quite well. So Flex is one of the world's larger electronics manufacturing companies supporting many different markets from, automotive, medical, industrial, telecommunications, and lifestyle. So I happen to have the role of leading technology for our lifestyle business. So I oversee about 5 billion of our revenue, touch almost $1 trillion worth of commerce through the different devices that we manufacture. There was a lot of conversation in the previous panel that I think is super relevant to the conversation that's in this one as well. I think with a lot of the disruptions and things that are taking place in the supply chain, There's tremendous opportunities right now, especially when you then bring it into the home. Not just the devices, but the actual logistics, the materials, the sustainability, all these things that, you know, the groups were talking about before are creating an environment where there's just this tremendous opportunity. So I'm actually excited to be on the panel. You know, we're deeply involved in looking at all the same things that you guys are working on, Thomas and Donald as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys and learning about it as well. But yeah, I'll be representing mostly the edge devices and a lot of the infrastructure that goes into the home, because we definitely are seeing a major trend on, you know, the home as a system. And we've got all these different sensors, and, you know, what goes on a device versus what goes part of the infrastructure of the home. There's a lot of discussion right now on where you put what and what's the most efficient way to actually design, build, and then operate a home. So thanks for inviting me, Mark.
Great pleasure, Dave. Thank you. Don, can I invite you to go next? An introduction, your technology, and how you see it impacting the value chains of real estate.
Sure. Thanks. First and foremost, thanks to Dr. Shin and the Rady School for inviting me to speak on the panel. And thanks to Mark as well for inviting me. Also, thanks for throwing me in with two very capable and competent CTOs. You know, the one CEO on the panel that's going to get thrown under the bus here, but I'll try to keep up. So I'm CEO of a company based out of Switzerland. We're on a mission to create unstoppable digital ecosystems. Really what that translates to is we're building out Web3 solutions, and with a particular emphasis on the data and analytics side of things, and the interoperability between organizations and entities within decentralized ecosystems. So when we start looking at that, I mean, you know, Tom, in reference to, you know, proxying physical devices or physical manifestations through a digital twin, what we're trying to do is incorporate the data that's coming from those sources and provide the analytical capabilities across, you know, a multi-source ecosystem. And we've been able to very successfully manifest this type of capability. And I think as we, you know, move into non-crypto, non-blockchain specific environments, you know, in particular into the home, interoperability of the data is going to be a massive play. And, you know, providing the ability to source provenance integrity, reputational aspects of the information, all of this is going to be integral in creating, you know, the successful devices and platforms and solutions of the future. So, you know, I think we're gonna get into the down the rabbit hole here a little bit, and I'm looking forward to it. So I'll leave it at that. And Mark, I guess questions from your side.
I guess a lot of this is fairly breakthrough stuff, right? It's the new frontier of decentralized ecosystems. And, you know, we looked at this structuring this panel, this webinar from the standpoint that there's technology emerging. It's going to represent new value creation opportunities. And there's a transition that's going to take place that sometimes is met with resistance, whether it's kind of internal organizational change or other forms of resistance. I'm very interested. Obviously, I see, Tom, what you're doing is one of the most right at that frontier of embracing the technology and driving adoption. Wanted to get your insights from that perspective and see if you have any comments in that regard.
Yes, so we are operating now for 6 years, right? So the whole industry was shifting. Some of the ideas needed some time to really penetrate the minds of the people and so on. But a shift happened. You know? So it's I would state it as it's the end of dumb objects. Yes? So because the moment you blockchain enable an object, it becomes a subject. So it becomes very active. Why? First thing is it has to be connected to a network. Second, the object has to be capable to tell you, I exist. Third, it has to give proof that it exists and is the real object. So the provenance, yes. So an object connected creates data, and the data have to be transferred. So you have to protect the data. You protect the provenance, you protect the data, and you even protect the channels. Yeah. So what happens then is that you have reactive objects which become real stakeholders in any kind of socio-economical processes, right? So your smart meter is not only a smart meter anymore, it helps you to consume energy in a sustainable way, or it even prerogates you what you can do with your energy or not, yes? Or it changes the attributes of your energy. So I don't know, it focuses on the carbon footprint and enables you to do business. So, you know, there is something completely new brewing up, it's emerging, and the really interesting thing is that the devices which enable this, how can I say, they are just coming and popping up now, and when you see them in action, so I show you one of the devices because it's always good you see it, right? So, you know, this is a device which is built around an AI chip, yeah? But it's also built around the so-called EUICC, so that's an eSIM, yeah? So a SIM card. A SIM card is the same thing like a credit card. So if I combine the credit card, yes, with the AI chip, which is also connected via some radio frequencies, yes, I turn it into a wallet. The wallet has an ID and can settle transaction. So what this means for business is something we are just finding out right now, and this is super exciting.
And in terms of new value creation that you see coming from these devices, could you describe what types of value creation opportunity there is? And
yes, it's also easy. In Europe, you know, we are quite strictly regulated. And so the regulators now try to push everything which is more or less green technology, sustainable, and so on. And the point is, how can you enforce it? So our take is you can only enforce it when you rely on this new hardware and these new protocols and blockchain technologies. So one of the recent projects we did was for a utility company with I think 4.5 billion turnover, and what we do there is we approve the provenance of the energy, right? So there are solar power plants which are owned by the citizens, so not anymore by the utility company or the maintainer. So you have to give proof that first the energy is produced indeed at this solar power plant. Secondly, any kilowatt hour produced is immediately written to the account of a beneficiary or a citizen. Third, this is tokenized, so the energy gets some kind of additional attributes. It's not only green and it's owned by someone. It can also be turned into a carbon certificate. The carbon certificate can then be traded, or you decide, no, I keep the token and swap it into another token, and then it's an on-ramp into the crypto economy, or you use it to invest it back into the power plant, then you become a shareholder. So these are the things we are dealing with at this point in time.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I mean, Don,
can I just add? I want to add to this. You know, just piggybacking off of what Tom said. You know, there's the emergence of net new agency in these ecosystems, right? And that agency is attached to actors that didn't actually exist before, right? So the smart meter having its own agency, perhaps it's acting on behalf of an individual or perhaps a municipality, right? And that gives businesses an entirely new revenue stream. These are active agents that are making choices and can make choices within these ecosystems that can effectively be marketed to, right? And so what you're really doing is this combinatorial aspect that, you know, Tom showed the device, AI plus reputation, and providing the wherewithal and the, you know, the proactive activity that basically manifests the agency within this device. that can be looked at from a business point of view as a target audience. So, you're effectively adding net new channels and net new customers to your entire ecosystem. And that's something that's like entirely emergent that, may or may not blow some minds, broadly speaking, and possibly on this, on this call. But, this is the type of, especially the stuff that Tom is working on, this is, they're pushing the envelope, and it's awesome to see.
So, Tom brought up the topic of the complexity of operating in Europe. Everybody knows GDPR. And in the previous panel, they talked about a little hesitance on sharing data. Could be for a variety of reasons. So the idea about trapped value, fractional utility that could be untrapped by some of these technologies. Don or anybody, where do you see kind of low-hanging fruit to apply some of these technologies in a real estate context? I know there are dozens and dozens, and you live this life all day long. But just name a couple for the purpose of the people listening.
Well, so I think it's a couple things. So for me, also operating in Europe, GDPR, I don't see it as a bad thing, or CCPA. These regulations aren't necessarily bad. They provide a foundation and the rails for which to operate, and then possibly to challenge going forward. What they really represent is, it's the manifestation of a lack of control, right? What the solutions that I think that, the technology that we're advocating for right now, this is putting control back into the quote unquote owner's hands, right? And this ties directly to aspects of consent, et cetera. So if you can combine, high fidelity data provenance and lineage against an actionable outcome, something like consent, you now have the means to say, okay, this asset can actually be used for this purpose, right? And once we get into the home, we start talking about, you've got smart fridges and smart devices, et cetera, but they're sort of passive, right? They're not really making, true economic or value added decisions. But, combine the devices that Tom's building with AI built in, plus the consent management that can be replicated and immutably recorded on chain, with transactional history for what's going back and forth. And you now have a means to say, you know what, regulation like CCPA or GDPR may be overly burdensome for a broad spectrum of applications, including, applications within the home. So, as the technology emerges, I think what you'll see is, conformity, both of the technology and the software and the outcomes that they enable to the regulation, but the regulation will also be modified to allow for the capture of value, the transmission of information, et cetera, in a more seamless fashion. So, and that's, ultimately going to be applicable everywhere: smart homes, smart devices, et cetera.
But Don,
I think
we have to add two things. We have also two breakthroughs in technology, right? First, we can do almost any kind of operation on encrypted data without decrypting them anymore. I think this is really changing a lot. So it's called homomorphic computing. Yes, this is the one thing. And the second thing are these famous zero knowledge proofs. So this means you can exchange facts about attributes without exchanging the attributes, right? And these two things are so, I don't know, I'm astonished every day I work with them.
Yeah, look, combining ZK with, MPC and homomorphic encryption and trusted execution environments, and bringing these different technology components together will help secure the data and provide that level of comfort. In the previous panel, there was a lot of, Evelyn brought it up. I think Andrew, you brought it up too, within the confines of, B2B and even within an organization, there being a lack of trust of the data. if you can establish a reputation around the data, and I think, Tom, you might agree with this, if you can have fine-grained fidelity on the source of that information, and that travels with the asset, or in our case, we're more interested in the federated aspects of all of this and applying things like federated learning so that the data assets don't actually need to move. You can do, the computations on device, et cetera. Then there's less burden, there's less impact of applications in terms of becoming a data controller as opposed to a pure data processor. And from that, the regulatory burden and the compliance issues, they kind of dissolve, right? So I agree with you 100%, Tom. There's new technology that's available now that wasn't available 5 years ago that we can take advantage of to really grease the wheels. But yeah. Dave, I think I'm going to hand it to you too.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit here. So first of all, every silicon provider right now is developing chipsets to accommodate this environment that we're speaking about, and they're rolling out those chipsets starting now. Part of the supply chain challenges that we're actually experiencing is because we're in that changeover process right now from legacy chipsets to these new smarter chipsets. So that's one of the things that, COVID happening, regionalization, globalization, all these things happening right at the same time that we were already in this transition from the silicon going from kind of dumb to smart is driving a lot of it. I'm gonna have a little bit of a different slant here, maybe. I actually think the consumer is going to drive it all. I don't actually have a lot of faith that the businesses in a B2B application are going to drive this thing. I think it's really around consumers and commerce and being able to exchange goods, knowing that the good that you're exchanging is what in fact you say it is. I think that the consumers are going to demand it, and that'll force the businesses to have to start complying with it. I think by nature, most businesses struggle with change. Right? You heard it in the last panel. You're a large corporation. You've got your shareholders that your investors that you have to respond to, and to go cannibalize your markets is really hard on those companies. And so it really requires a consumer to come in and say, I demand this. I want it this way. And I think that's what's awesome about these smarter devices, because as they get smarter, there's applications being built around these devices that benefit the consumer. And the more that the consumer gets benefit from it, the more it pushes the pressure back on the OEMs that are designing and making these products. I don't think they would do it necessarily on their own. Outside of maybe like a Google or Amazon, the rest of the world, for the most part, would be a laggard, and it wouldn't happen as fast as we all think, in my opinion.
I agree with you on the home front. I will challenge you that we experience a lot of appetite from the business side. The caveat though is I'm coming out of the Web3 space, so it's not. Yeah, it's not the it's a different market. I think
it's all just so for background for you guys. So in my role, I run our innovation, I run our technology. So I'm usually sitting down with all the consumer product companies 2 or 3 years ahead of anyone ever seeing the product that'll be out on the shelf at some point, right? And when we're in those brainstorm ideation, I'm listening to their concepts and things, I'm always flabbergasted at the lack of innovation and the reluctance to try to press the envelope when you're looking 2-3 years out, and you would think, okay, we should be a little bit more thought-provoking here. You'd be shocked at how many times we're in those meetings and you're not really hearing anything that is super innovative. And you'll bring up something innovative and they'll look at you like you're crazy. Right. And then a few years later, you come back and say, I told you, because now some startup company is, kicking their ass in the market over that same idea that they could have had.
So Dave, this is such an interesting point, because we heard this comment on cannibalization, but is it purely this idea of cannibalization, or does something have to change within the legacy organizations to build up competencies to think partnerships, think ecosystems, think outside of the traditional roles that existed, from a solutions innovation standpoint?
Yeah, for the most part, you don't get rewarded in these large companies for taking big risks, right? Because there's an investment profile to everything that you do, and you get certain things bought off based on a hypothesis of your investment profile. And because of that, I think people tend to be a little bit too conservative, right? And corporations, you know, outside of a handful that are really big into R&D, you know, the rest of the companies just aren't going to press the envelope that much. It's easier to watch the startups slug it out for a handful of years and then maybe go acquire the startup after they've kind of solved the challenges. I think that's just become part of the way it is today, right? So it's not so much, that's why I was kind of saying, I don't know that it's the big companies. I think it's going to be more individuals and startups that probably actually move this needle.
So I know we're going to jump into Q&A and also kind of panel to panel conversation. I get a sense that there's a lot of interest questions that are brewing, but and for each of you, where do you see the most untapped potential in applying the technologies to build new value in real estate? Like, you just pick one or two areas, how it could be applied to generate new value, and where you see, you know, biggest emerging potential.
Let me kick this. I'll kick this one off, Mark. So a couple of major trends on the consumer product front, right? First of all, consumers more and more want a personalized experience. So the consumers want a more personalized, customizable experience. The other thing that we know is that the millennial generation is tending towards buying fewer things of higher quality and more functionality compared to the previous generations, which were more about buying a lot of things at cheaper prices. So you've got a massive change that's taking place right now, which is stressing the OEMs. And I think that this technology is going to enable more data driven on what that consumer preference really is, which then that'll spin off new design cycles. And those design cycles will be built around combining and converging the technologies and the functionality that the consumer actually wants. It's fascinating. Look at, you know, who would have thought 3 years ago that someone would buy a $500 hairdryer?
So,
right?
So you've highlighted how some of the future value is going to be linked to this data-driven solutions and data sharing, and you're coming, largely from the hardware world, and then working with innovators to try and, bring solutions to market. And I guess that, the physical to digital world is kind of where Tom plays, and the data governance world where Don plays. Could either of you talk to where do you see the biggest value potential, the low-hanging fruit that could be adopted if we just change the way we're thinking or overcame some change management factor?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, Don, I know you have all.
Sure.
So go ahead.
I wouldn't. Yeah. So I think that, the biggest opportunity, if we're looking at real estate, is, it's in the system interoperability and the data interoperability, specifically between protocols and networks. And when I think about this, I think, there's the protocols and networks for, buildings, homes, apartment blocks, et cetera. Then there's the energy networks, and then there's the municipal infrastructure and those networks, and being able to share data and information across those networks. I think that's the largest opportunity. It's not the simplest problem to solve, but I think part of the issue historically, right, from a contemporary point of view, the way that this type of issue or problem or use case would be solved is taking a consolidated data model approach, where you're trying to standardize and normalize assets across all of these networks so that they all conform to some specific standard at the data model level, for instance, right? And that's a very difficult and, I would argue largely redundant task. What you really want to have is a federated approach. Allow these systems to exist and operate independently of one another, but also interoperate, right? And that requires taking a look at these systems from a slightly different angle, and applying applicable protocols to make sure that interoperability works. And this is something that, you know, what we're doing from the Web3 side is really developing out these protocols, right? And then migrating them back from the Web3 space into the Web2 space. That's it's a big driver for what we do. And I think if it's going to take some time, we're still working on it, and we're tackling specific use case problems at the moment. But over time, I think what we're doing and what others are doing within our domain space will become broadly applicable, and you'll really start to see, you know, the ability for a road network and traffic lights to communicate with emergency response networks that can respond to fire detection within the home, right? And so, you know, we'll work towards that, but that's where I see the biggest opportunity, data sharing amongst these networks.
Great. I know we had scheduled to do a Q&A, but also kind of combining the panels into the Q&A. But I see one question that's been posted, and so maybe Melanie, if you can kind of merge the panels at this point, I'll pose the question because I think it flows from the conversation. The question was, are there any thoughts on how Web 3.0 can help achieve ESG outcomes? So, for example, new business models embracing sustainability. You know, I think about the data governance of sharing data for purpose of sustainability. If anybody would, people would not have a problem sharing their data if it was for a socially good purpose like ESG. They may not want to share their data if it's for other purposes that, you know, involve, you know, for-profit types of outcomes. And so ESG is a very interesting one, but the question is, are there any thoughts on how 3.0 can help with that, with driving those outcomes? Does anybody have some comments on that one?
So take material passports, right? So when a steel factory is producing a rod of steel and it travels along the supply chain, yes, it's completely tracked. So you have track and trace solutions in place. And you also know the chemical composition, you know the value of the composite products and so on. So when the steel rod travels till it's embedded into, let's say, a real estate building, yes, there's still steel of certain quality, yes, constantly embedded into the building. So this is called material bank. Yeah. So, and then you can take the value of this steel inside the building, yes, and turn it into a token, and then you have liquidity. So what does it mean? Yes, you have to consider the recoverability of this metal, right? And it's not just wasted, it stays inside the circular economy. So whenever something is produced, it's not produced to be wasted, it's produced to be reused. And the value travels with this kind of product in a new way. So suddenly you see business popping up at places you have never thought about. Yeah? This is one case. Another case is the same thing is, you know, the steel is produced and you know how much of the energy used for it in percentage is green energy or not green energy. So you can more or less, when you sell the product, you can, the rod, yes, you can also sell carbon footprint or carbon certificates. And this also helps because, yes, a certain steel of rod can be of higher value because you trade it together with the carbon footprint or environmental hazardous footprint. And this changes a lot. So this kind of circular economy, because you have these huge registries within blockchains, are changing many, many things for business.
That's a fantastic insights into one potential way that could support ESG. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other insights or wants to pose a question to any of the respective panelists. I know panel 1 has been listening. Do you have any questions for panel 2 members, or let's light it on fire here?
Yeah,
so
hi.
I guess
This is Shahid. I have a question that can probably apply to all the panels here. I've heard about 2 different topics that are kind of connected across the 2 panels: single source of truth and interoperability across networks. So whether I think about blockchain, whether I think about IoT, whether I think about all the different ERP systems between finance, HR, procurement, they all rely on data, and there needs to be a common set of data. But we live in a world where each of these systems are in silos. They don't cut across very well. And so developing a single source of truth becomes extremely difficult. So I would welcome thoughts from both the speakers from both the panels around how do we think about driving towards a single source of truth?
I mean, I can take a stab at it. Certainly, having spent a bunch of time at SAP and Ariba, obviously, SAP is considered to be one of those systems. Ariba is one of those systems. Not easy is the short answer. That's the truth answer. Yeah, we can talk about technology. I mean, we've been trying to do blockchain into SAP for a long time, but I would say that to that for now, at least. So it's not easy, but I tell you one thing I do think which is going to enable this movement to SaaS that we are seeing, the Web 3.0 in the context. I do believe over a period of time, when you look forward, these silos will be broken. I think, yes, the world needs a bookkeeping software, which is the source of truth sort of for some financial activity, but the rest of the world will get connected in a much better way, like what Web 2.0 do to consumer world, where everything was an API'd. I think similar concept will happen I think that's what is needed to move the needle from a data sharing perspective, is really the move to the new SaaS world where data sharing is at the core of it, because you're talking about best of breed applications now. When the best of breeds all come together, you will solve the information problem. And of course, the fear is, hey, if I use more applications, does it mean it's even more complex?
Yeah.
I feel it will be less complex over a period of time. It is more complex right now.
Yeah.
Isn't it more of a behavioral problem than it is a technical?
I would say it's both though, right, Dave? It's not just behavioral problem. It's a technical too. It's not like the systems out of the box are meant to talk to each other. So there is a little bit of that too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I'm sure many of you on this call remember the days when connecting to the internet, via dial-up, and the internet was a very distant kind of entity, far away from the desktop. And I remember when Bill Gates announced that he saw browsing the web would just be a seamless part of using your desktop computer. And I personally didn't believe that. And that's, of course, exactly what's happened. And now with authentication and the ability to access many systems, in the consumer world and the business world, I think this is exactly what we're seeing happening in B2B and across the supply chain as well. So, I really think it probably does have to be quite industry and ecosystem driven to say that there'll be a single source of the truth, literally that sits in, for every single vertical. That's probably a long way off. But again, what we're seeing is go into a particular kind of supply chain. Maybe it's automotive components in North America, for example, or maybe it's electrical products in the UK, and you can actually quite quickly get in between the key kind of trading partners in that vertical, in that geography, and establish something which can be a single source of truth. And so I see that there will then be that kind of network of these ecosystem specific kind of platforms, and then they will start to merge together as well. And that's exactly what I'm seeing happening at the moment.
Shahid, I would just like to add, I think the problem of single source of truth is not new. 25 years ago, that was the promise of ERP, right? And if you look today, an average company, Fortune 100 company has a minimum of 32 instances of an ERP. So now we just, talking about it all over again with the advent of blockchain and movement to SaaS and cloud, but the problem hasn't changed. I personally believe, I think people focus just on developing the single source of truth are really focusing on the wrong problem. I think companies that will do a good job in building translation services, the ability to take data from one silo and allow you to very seamlessly map it with another silo, are the ones which will kind of help enable, kind of alleviate some of the pain. But I think really hoping that there is just one single source of truth that exists within an organization and across organizations is, although idealistically a great idea, but it's the same discussion we had 30 years ago. And I'm sorry, maybe I'm much older than many people here, but it's we're talking about it all over again.
Yeah. I just want to add, I agree with that. I mean, I'm a data engineer. That's what I spent a good chunk of my career doing. And I would disagree. I think it's an education problem. Number one, I don't think it's single source of truth. It's single source of fact. Your truth is as it's applied to a specific use case, but what you're looking for is what's actually going on. And then, the takeaway that I have from my experience is that this sort of model that's been imposed on us to consolidate, to create data lakes, to create data warehouses, et cetera, it serves its purpose to a point, but it is not the singular answer, right? I'm a strong proponent for data federation and allowing assets to exist as they should, as they're recorded as fact, and then trying to bring those disparate assets together. And so not looking to drive conformity, but, trying to rein in the entropy across these networks. And, I think if we start to change the outlook of how we're solving these problems, the solutions will also change along with that.
Yeah, very interesting perspective of single source of facts and the translational capabilities across the networks and how do you connect them together. So maybe Sean, maybe that's an idea from a VC perspective. You're going to think about the company that can do that the best. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. Maybe one last question I see online from Jimmy Ankleseria, who's for those who don't know him, he is a pioneer in the supply chain, value chain space. He was the board of the ISEI and a critical part of developing the program with the University of California, San Diego. So Jimmy, thank you for your question. His question as a follow-up to this discussion is, in an old procurement culture of confrontation and only lip service to genuine collaboration, what changes have to be made in the cultural traditional buyers to benefit from value of technology?
It's a good one, Shai. This is a great question. It goes to the heart of some of the problems, right? I would take it this way, right? If you heard the term, I'll use some derogatory terms from procurement world called long tail, maverick spend. Those are the very, very interesting terms that every procurement person has used. But I tell you one thing, we forgot one important thing. We forgot to talk to the business user and ask them, what is a long tail spend to you? Just taking it as an example to highlight a point. The point is long tail to one is not the same as a long tail to other. The truth is buying a laptop, which is considered to be a very strategic, very important spend to procurement, is actually long tail to business. They couldn't care less where the laptop comes from, in all honesty. They care for where the executive coach who's going to give a coaching at my next executive event cares from, even though I may only spend 20,000. And the point I'm trying to make here is, I think the whole notion that we have to get closer to the business user is super important, and how we think about procurement has to be gone up. The world is actually upside down. The way, whatever procurement has been thought about for last 30, 40 years, actually the world, I believe, is upside down, completely opposite of what we have believed.
So building on that, so what you're saying is even the traditional role of the buyer has changed from buying and procuring to really building relationships and getting closer to the business to generate value for the business. Very different world.
Exactly.
Okay, folks, and with that, let me turn it back to Professor Shin. I think at the top of the hour, I'm going to thank, from my perspective, all the panelists who joined us today. Professor Shin, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Shahid, as well as Mark. Thank also all the fabulous panelists. It was actually great discussion. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I am sure of our attendees also really enjoyed this discussion. I would like to also thank our advisory board members for the Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation, in particular, Jimmy Ankleseria, John Proverbs, and Lou Ferretti, who also attended this webinar. Lastly, I would also like to thank our staff, Melanie, our program director, as well as student coordinators, Jeremy and Anushka. And before we finish, I would also like to do a quick advertisement of our next webinar, which is about Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which will happen in October 20th, around the same time. So please follow our LinkedIn, which is actually posted on the chat. And please stay tuned. We will have another interesting webinar coming in October and many more coming in the future too. And again, thank you for participating and thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.